if you go deep in one area and you're showing true authority in one area, there's kind of this halo effect where people might say, hey, you know what, I'm in this, area that's slightly outside of what you do, but I can tell you guys know your stuff. Would you be interested or able to work with us too? And, in that instance, depending on what your, client load is like, you can say yes to those things.
Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
So today on the show, I'm very excited to welcome David Hoos. So David is the founder of Haus Advisors, where he helps $2 million to $20 million software dev and other adjacent tech-focused agencies escape referral-dependent growth and build predictable pipelines through positioning, authority, and strategic outreach. So I'm always excited to have on others that are looking to help agencies solve the modern biz dev problem, because it's one of these, we're looking to do the same through different channels and different angles. But you can never get more perspectives. And it's one of those problems that if you don't solve it, all the other problems kind of don't matter, which is something I heard David C. Baker point out recently. So with
Mhm.
that, David, it's great to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So before we get into things, would you mind kind of quickly going through your background and your journey and how you got to founding your consultancy?
Yeah. So basically I think back in 2012, started working at a professional services company. It had a software component to it, but that's where I kind of got into marketing expert services, turned that into, got a job at my first agency proper. And I was employee number 3, and I was charged with leading all the marketing and basically bringing in qualified leads. And so because I was so early in that stage, I learned a ton there. And, that led me to some other agencies over time. And yeah, fast forward to today, I worked about probably 10 plus years in-house, and then have worked with Haus Advisors for the last, I think 2.5 years now, helping basically multiple technical agencies at the same time, to solve that same sort of pipeline, marketing sort of problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess from your experience, so were you in a technical agency, by the way? Is that kind of the transition, or how would you describe the agency you're in?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The target market for all 3 of them was the same. It was all e-com, like direct to consumer sort of brands.
Mhm.
But the first agency I was in was a conversion optimization. So we kind of had this marriage of UX design and development. So I think that's where I kind of maybe developed an interest on the technical side of things, or at least a way to be able to converse well in that space. Um, yeah, the other one, I mean, I worked at a SMS and email marketing agency, and another one was a uh, influencer marketing agency. So those weren't very technical, but they were places where I got to apply what I had really learned in that first agency, which was a really great experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what I guess like thinking about solving the pipeline problem, what were some of the things you were doing back then and how have they changed and what's still valid from what you're showing clients now?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of how I approach things today is still taken from that first agency job I had. I think the CEO there really ran things in a super smart way. One of the things that we really recognized early on, this goes back to kind of the foundation of what I preach, is around positioning. When I got there, we had 3 different ICPs that we were targeting. I think it was SaaS, e-com, and subscription brands. And as I was tasked with like kind of running the content operation, I was like, okay, well, what do they all have in common? Let's maybe write some content to a common denominator. And it didn't get any engagement. Like it was just it just kind of fell on deaf ears. And I was like, okay, that's probably because nobody sees themselves in this kind of broad content. So I was like, well, let's try individual content for all 3 of them. And we did that. It took 3 times the resources and 3 times the time. But all of them resonated much better that way. And I was like, okay, so we figured out like what works, but we also learned that if we want to keep on trying to speak to 3 different markets, we're going to have to have and basically use 3 times the money and time. And when you're a small in that early stage, you don't want to be spending that much money. You need to really be doubling down on what's working. And so I think at that point we had probably 70% of our clients were in the e-com space. And it was like, okay, well, we don't have to like, go and fire the other uh, portion of them, but let's focus all of our content on those best fit clients, those e-com clients. And so, and the funny thing was, is, fast forward multiple years, yeah, we worked with a lot more e-com clients from that, but we also would still get the occasional like SaaS or basically some sort of adjacent prospect that fit one of those other categories. But because we had gone so deep and shown so much authority in the e-com space, um, we still got leads from outside of that. So that's one thing I'd like to tell folks who are kind of afraid of niching down or picking kind of a lane, is that if you go deep in one area and you're showing true authority in one area, there's kind of this halo effect where people might say, hey, you know what, I'm in this, area that's slightly outside of what you do, but I can tell you guys know your stuff. Would you be interested or able to work with us too? And, in that instance, depending on what your, client load is like, you can say yes to those things, you know?
Yeah, and I think one thing that gets taken for granted is like there is the nuts and bolts ability to execute in a particular niche, right? Like
Mhm.
like I wouldn't know how to do what we do for pharma sellers or something. Like it's very specialized. And then that's probably about like, a certain percentage of the effort. And then there's a huge other percentage which is just ability to speak their language, right? And that's the
Mhm.
thing that I think feels cosmetic a little bit, but it's very real, right? So like in the agency world, there's all these little idiosyncrasies that I know and you probably know too with dealing with that audience, which is like, for example, using the word lead or leads is going to put you in spam, either mentally or literally a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But lead generation is less bad and prospect is better for like, and that's our niche of biz dev and solving that problem.
Mhm.
Like, so same goes for our clients. Like if you're selling into, healthcare versus financial services versus e-commerce, it's going to be different. And there's a lot that goes into that. So to bring this to you, can you talk a little bit about, how you're working with clients from day one and just like what are some of those mistakes you're seeing that you're helping them with?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if this is common to other types of agencies. I mean, I think I saw it when I was on the marketing side of things. But I definitely recognize it on the dev side of things, is that I think there's a lot of kind of technical agencies who think that, you know, splashing, we develop custom software products or custom websites, things is some sort of differentiator. It's like leading with your capabilities is not going to make you stand out from, you know, a thousand other agencies that also have similar capabilities. And then, sometimes they'll say, well, but we write really good code. And it's like, well, that's table stakes. Like everyone who is going to go work with an agency wants to make sure that they're getting good code. So I think there's maybe it's because they're kind of so far on the technical side that they're not as marketing um, savvy or something like that. But I think there's a real importance um, to I don't know, being really clear, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Let's kind of like double click into the clarity element. What have you seen work well for your clients in terms of like developing that perspective and remaining defensible? And if you have an example, that would be great.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the place I always like to start is with your existing client base or case studies. So I guess say current and former clients. Um, and the reason for that is if you are going to pivot or niche down, you want to do it to a place where you already have some social proof that you can deliver. Um, talked to some dev agency founders where they're like, I think we want to pick this niche over here. And it's like, have you done work for people in that niche before? And they're like, no, it just looks like it would be profitable. It's like, well, you can't do that. Like you need to go and look who you've actually worked with before and evaluate them across like a range of criteria. Like see, um, like who's been a good fit for your team, or your team enjoyed the work, where the margins were good, where the actual outcomes that you promised and that you delivered were good or better than expected. You're basically kind of evaluating from all these different dimensions and then seeing, okay, well, who are the clients that kind of become like the cream that rises to the top? Who are the top 10% or 15% of your clients? And then look for patterns. It's like, oh, do these all happen to be in the finance space, or do these all happen to be in healthcare? Like, oh, we didn't see it before because we were working with a whole bunch of different client types, but we're recognizing now that maybe we could double down in this area and get good results, enjoy our work, like all those things I just mentioned. And so, yeah, and then you're automatically going to have that built-in social proof because you already have some case studies there. So it's going to make it easier to, once you pivot, all your sort of marketing assets to that new positioning, you'll have the proof part already in place.
Yeah, and what I think is sort of creates a lot of hand wringing and indecision is like this map is not the territory sort of effect of niching, right? Where it's like you have to sort of figure out like are you are you looking at the overall territory at 50 miles across the ocean and then you're sailing towards it and then figure out like is that what you're doing right now or are you drawing the map to help you reach that territory? So for example, like if you're drawing the map to help you reach the promised land of this golden area where you have great clients, that's not going to be the exact same thing as the territory. And drawing the map might be, hey, you're doing targeted outreach, and you've got to come up with the titles and companies and industries that probabilistically fit into this bucket. That's a completely different thing than hey, there's these 5 clients that we've worked with over the last few years, and they're awesome, and we want more people like them. So they're kind of different things, and I think that people trying to combine those 2 exercises into one end up doing nothing because they end up just, like, iterating forever on that. So how do you feel about that framework, and does that jog any exercises or ideas you've maybe worked through with clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm understanding it correctly, you're saying like if there is a direction that you want to go that's maybe not where you are currently, how does that fit into what I'm saying with positioning? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, like you might be looking at these sunny spots and you might have 5 or 10 clients and you want more people like them. I think there's a certain freedom in knowing that the map's not the territory and knowing that like the exercise of building tactical marketing funnels or doing outreach or whatever isn't always going to capture the full breadth of all the great people you can work with, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I do tell people is, especially if they're like sub 1 million, like they're still kind of earlier on in their journey, is that I actually think, I give the opposite advice when you're going 0 to 1, is that working with a range of different client types is actually a good thing. Uh, if you try to niche down prematurely, you're not going to have enough experience across a range of different verticals or whatever to see where you might be doing your best work. So in those early days, I would say, do a range of things, see what seems to be working. And then, maybe once you've tapped out your network and you've tapped out a lot of your biz dev efforts, and you can tell that there's kind of a plateau or a ceiling that you're hitting, that's where you can start looking at like, okay, well, maybe we need to reposition and double down around a segment of our prior clients that are the best fit. And we could scale around that. Because really what it comes down to is you're up to that 1 million mark or thereabouts. You've been leaning on sort of the built-in authority of referrers, of partners, things like that. And once you get to that certain point where your network and whatnot are starting to get saturated, you need to figure out, how am I going to convince strangers to start working with us? And the best way to do that is to build authority, to show that you've done similar work before for people like them before, and gotten good results before.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the one thing that I had to go through a bit of a journey with, and that I've sort of interrogated and then rebuilt our business around, is the idea of tapping out the network, right? And I think I used to feel the same way, that like there's this point where, yep, the networks run dry, you squeeze all the juice out of it. And I've sort of rethought that. And I think that a couple things have happened, and I'd love to hear your perspective or your thoughts on this too. But like most of our clients have gotten more specialized, and that means, like we're talking about, in order to compete, and that's just been what's necessary. And because of that, their markets have gotten smaller, right? And then I think in parallel with that, probably part of the same force, the amount of skepticism has increased. Like most buyers have been burned by agencies, and if they're not, they have just like limited time and resources to hire people, but also to consume content, like and buy things and in general. Like this is a macro thing. So what I've sort of seen is like, well, it turns out like there's also these other industries where a small handful of partnerships can fuel companies to billion-dollar levels, like Silicon Valley functions in that way, financial services, et cetera. So what we've sort of seen is like if the agency can actually go after these partnerships proactively, and honestly, like a lot of what happens is the network is dormant and is sort of bigger than people think it is, right? Because like
Hmm.
these relationships you have right in front of you, and then there's another layer of people that you just kind of forget about that might be able to introduce you to the same people. So I wanted to kind of like respectfully push back on that a little bit, and but also with a caveat that it's not a monotheistic thing. Like you also are going to be building authority and going outside of that, and getting people through multiple channels, like a mini stock portfolio. But anyway, I've elaborated a lot. Let me pause there. Like, how do you feel about that? And how is that sort of conform with your experience?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned partnerships. I think I'm still a big believer in partnerships. I actually think that strong positioning, like a strong focus on a particular ICP, actually makes partnerships easier because then you can go and figure out who are other adjacent service providers or software providers that serve that same target market. You know, if you work with 5 different ICPs, then it's going to be like, well, who do we go and try to find who do we partner up with? Whereas if it's like, hey, you know what? All of our best clients are in healthcare. Okay, who else? Like, what other types of vendors does a healthcare, our ideal client, who else do they work with? Well, we're say a dev shop, but they might work with a branding agency and a marketing agency and some of these other folks who are also specialized in healthcare, and we can go and partner with them and send leads back and forth to each other because we both kind of share that same deep expertise in the healthcare space. So um, we might just be talking a little bit like, comparing apples and oranges or something like that, because I think we might be closer than we think.
Yeah, I think so too. And I just kind of wanted to interrogate that distinction a little bit. And that's kind of what I see as well, because like we run Facebook ads. We have more so we have like LinkedIn content going out and stuff. And it sort of brings everybody in the niche along with it when people interact, and then it spreads out to everybody. So I think, and oftentimes I think what I've seen is that the people, a lot of the buyers and the prospects are more likely to lurk, and then the people that interact are people like yourself and me and like other consultants that are more like peers or colleagues, or the ones that are like more willing to engage. So,
Yeah.
um, I think there's a lot of that dynamic. So with that, to shift gears a little bit, I think like look, before we throw on the recorder, like the elephant in the room for every episode is AI. Um, what are you seeing there? Like, what's the sort of fact, promise, let's say, from on the ground reality for the dev agencies you're working with? How scared are they? How scared should they be? And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think just based off of what I've seen so far, I think there's kind of the early stages, over the last year where it's like, okay, ChatGPT is cool and it'll accelerate some things. But I think some of the more recent stuff with Claude and Claude Code is making people be like, okay, like this is accelerating and getting good very quickly. Um, but here's, I guess, where I'd caveat that I don't think that dev shops are in total danger. I think the dev shops that are um, have been focused on providing commodity services without providing any sort of strategy are those ones are going to have trouble. But I think what it comes down to is AI has it's typical supply and demand. It's there's now much more supply of the development side of things, so demand is going to decrease for the execution work. That said, the strategy side, like what should we build? How should we build it? What's what's the right way to test it out and validate it? That sort of thing. That strategy work is still going to be valuable. I think it's going to be even more valuable. A metaphor I like to use is, Hollywood makes movies. When the iPhone camera came out, people were like, "Oh no, like we're democratizing filmmaking. This is going to destroy Hollywood." It's like, well, no, it's not going to destroy Hollywood. Yes, there might be some burgeoning filmmakers that show up who like did something really clever with their iPhone camera and were able to make something and that actually put them on the map, but it didn't destroy Hollywood. And so I think there's, I think we're going to see a lot more maybe prototypes built by individuals who maybe have an idea and they just kind of want to test things out. And maybe we'll see some, some big tech companies come out of something that began as just a vibe coded app. But I think there's enough that can't be replaced. That I don't think dev agencies are going anywhere as a whole. Like I mentioned, there's going to be the commoditized execution only focused ones that are going to struggle, but the folks that really know how to build a product, and I think I see this too, where there's a lot of dev agencies that are pivoting towards language around we're a product agency, like we'll help you build a product, not we're just going to help you code stuff.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that too. And that was gonna kind of be my next question is how can these dev agencies better position themselves? So you mentioned the product angle. I think the thing that's always tricky is there's kind of this like getting friend zoned dynamic to use kind of a crass like dating metaphor where like you're your client's like, oh, these people help us with dev, and turns out maybe the client's not literally Claude coding stuff in-house, but maybe there's some other agency that's a quarter of the price that's just using AI on the back end. Or the client says, you should be charging us this much less because of AI. So for that sort of agency, like what are you either seeing or helping them with? Like how are like what's the first move that they need to be thinking about in order to like better position themselves, either with current clients or new ones?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to, we talked about positioning earlier, and I think especially if they're going to market right now with just sort of like we build custom apps or custom software, like that is not going to help you win. I think what you need to do is it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You need to look at who you've done your best work for, and maybe it's finance or legal or something like that, and double and triple down there. Speak their language. Like you can show, okay, here's how we've done stuff specifically for solving these uniquely legal issues, so that if say a law firm or a law company is comparing agencies, like, well, here's someone who can just code us anything versus here's an agency that has done other law related software or apps. They know kind of where the potholes are in the whole process. Like even if their price is a little bit higher, they have more credibility and authority around actually getting us to the outcome that we want.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up legal because I was reading this really interesting article. It was a Substack about DocuSign. Did you happen to catch that one?
Mhm.
So DocuSign has always been made fun of, even before the AI boom, because it's like it has 7,000 people in it, and everyone's like, "Why do you need 7,000 people to run an app? You just check a box and sign a thing." And basically, this article was going through it and it was referencing interviews with the CEO. And the fact is, like, DocuSign has an amazing amount of complexity attached to it, right? Because you have templates, you have compliance, you have literally like every court system across the world has to be tied into DocuSign. It changes all the time. They have enterprise buyers that, are doing contracts like 20 a day with all sorts of different situations that need to be courtroom compliant across the world. So just ops alone, I forget the numbers, but that was like 1,000 of the employees, and then or 2,000 maybe, and then the rest were basically just a factor of sales and marketing. Like we had this many leads that on the enterprise side, they need to go through this many people, so it makes sense to have a few thousand salespeople slash supporting marketing roles. So you just think about like as just a case study, something as simple as DocuSign. It's just hand wave away. Oh, it's just a checkbox with a little signature app. Like I can just do this in a PDF or whatever. And it's like, actually, no, actually, like there's a really viable business there. The CEOs, if anything, it just sees AI as a genuine opportunity to grow, and so on. And I would assume that that same dynamic plays out across the dev sphere, right? Like, but it's really about solving complicated business issues that involve issues beyond just coding. So I'll
Yeah.
leave it at that. Like, how does that resonate? And do you have any clients that are kind of thinking in that way?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think the ones that are doing well are the ones who've already kind of made that realization, whether it's, we realize that, you know, shipping and logistics, has some great need, and we've worked with multiple clients in that space. So I know one client that basically they spun off a separate brand because they didn't want to like uh, change, like pivot their core business, but they're like, well, let's just have this separate business that's like just focuses on software development for shipping and logistics. But there's a ton of what I will call legacy brands. So essentially companies who are already out there, they've made their millions, billions, whatever. And they want to have a software or technical component, but they don't want to become a tech company. And so like they're the ones who they need somebody who they can hire to build something for them and maintain for them. And they'll stick with that agency for a long time, if they build something that works well and is familiar with their industry. I think where it's harder for a lot of the dev agencies is when maybe they get a founder who has some funding, who just wants to build like version one of something, and then it reaches a certain point of growth, and all their VCs are saying, okay, now you got to like hire all your dev talent in house, and so the agencies end up losing clients because um, it's just kind of a natural recommendation if you're funded to basically run everything internally at a certain point. So I would recommend most dev agencies, um, unless they like turnover, to focus more on a lot of these. Like there's just so many of these legacy brands in kind of non-tech verticals that you could be helping basically digitally transform, to borrow another sort of uh, buzzword.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting about that is kind of back to the original, like looking at your best clients thing and not necessarily just being like a moth to the flame of where the growth is happening is like, yes, there's the biggest growth we've ever seen with funded tech companies that have some sort of AI involvement, but you're also now competing with the smartest or the people that think they're the smartest people on earth that are will try and some often succeed or fail to do everything in house using vibe coding and OpenClaw or whatever, or you could be looking to help legacy industries get better, right? So it's like there is opportunity in both, but I know that most people go to one versus the other.
Yeah. I think it sometimes feels a little sexier if you're like working with startups. It's like, well, this could be the next unicorn. But I think probably 9 times out of 10, it's not. Um, but then like I had a client who um, their their best uh, their best client was in like the funeral space,
Mm.
and they built something for them that like made that company, you know, a ton of money, and they still maintained it, and it was, I don't know, it's just like one of those things where it's like it's not a space that you would necessarily assume that there would be opportunity, but I think there's a lot more opportunity out there than a lot of dev agencies realize in some of these legacy categories.
Yeah, yeah. I think tied to that, the next thing I'd love to dig into is kind of this like double-edged sword dynamic of AI. And we talked about the external, usage of AI and repositioning and all that. I'd love to hear about the internal usage. I don't run a dev agency, but even in our company, I've had probably like dozens of ideas for building software and how software can help. And finally, with Claude Code and Vibe Coding, developed one into a product we're calling Howdy Partner that helps agencies manage referrals and partnerships and stuff. And I'm excited about it. It was fun to build and so on. And I would imagine that like in dev agencies, there's probably a list of like hundreds of things that could be built. So I'd love to hear like from your clients, are they vibe coding stuff for either internal use or client facing? And do you have any thoughts on how to prioritize that kind of work and how to think about it?
Yeah, um, some of the clients that I've worked with, they're moving away from their legacy CMS into something that's completely like agentic. So, they can just say, hey, we want to update this page using these styles, and it just builds it, so they don't have to be running on WordPress or some other sort of thing. I don't think that's going to be for everyone, but if they're in the business of showing like their clients what can be done with agentic development, then maybe that's the right choice for them. So I think um, that's one angle. I'm trying to think of some other. No, that's the biggest one that comes to mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think like with prompting and with vibe coding and all these uses of AI, one of the biggest things I've run into is I end up working way more than I ever have just because of it.
Yeah,
The work is fun, right? It's like it's sometimes fun and engaging and something because you have this immediate like dopamine feedback loop of things that you're building, but it can also just be a huge waste of time. So like I'm by far not practicing what I preach very well, but I'm trying to focus everything around the constraint of the business. And then if AI helps, great. If not, then that's okay too. My first question is like, assuming you agree with that, do you have any recs for how dev agencies can identify that constraint and kind of focus on that one thing more?
mm, it's a good question. I mean, I think it was Michael Porter had a quote that said, "Strategy is what you say." I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's something about strategy is what you say no to. Um, it's essentially it's cutting away what um, is actually non-essential. And yeah, I mean, I, I, I believe that very, very, very strongly. Um, I think I just lost track of your train of thought. Sorry.
No, I'm very good asking jumbled questions, so it's not all on you. But I was basically just saying, like, the kind of finding the constraint in the business, and it sounds like for a lot of agencies now, it's most like, especially dev, it's probably positioning is going to be one of the usual suspects on the list. But I'd love to hear if there's any others.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest one that I've seen, honestly. Maybe the other constraint is not having um there's a lot of left brain like we can build it, but not a lot of like right brain kind of on the marketing side of things. I think that's why I've kind of landed in the space that I have is that um there's a lot more dev agencies who are happy to admit there's like, yeah, the marketing thing is a little bit more of a mystery to us. Like we're really good at building stuff for our clients, and we're happy to delegate some of the pipeline stuff to somebody outside of that. So I think that's maybe an area of struggle. Um, yeah, I mean the positioning thing. I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter whether you're a dev agency or any other sort of agency. I think that's always a struggle because you're essentially saying, who do we want to say no to? And going back to that Michael Porter quote,
Yep.
it's a hard thing to do because you think you're going to be sacrificing some potential new business. But then going back to the very beginning where I was talking about those three different ICPs that we had at my first company,
Mhm.
Like trying to talk to everyone, and you're going to end up talking to no one, or you're going to spend 3 times or however many more times trying to reach multiple separate audiences.
Right. And solving kind of downstream business problems or upstream, however you want to think about it. That
Mhm.
makes sense. Just out of curiosity, like how many of the shops you're working with are using vibe coding and that sort of thing is like their primary way of building what they do, or and how many are doing it the old way still?
I mean, I think all of them are experimenting with it.
Mhm.
Um, I think, and some of them are a little more. I don't know. I think most of them are. I don't know. It's impacting them in one way or another. They're yeah. I mean, I think the hard part is that it's it's rapidly developing. Like Claude, I think over the last like 30 days had like 28 releases or something like that. Um, and I think right now it's kind of like, well, where is all this going to slow down or stop? Like where what they're going to have to keep up with and learn is actually going to be something that they can um, then build upon. But I think right now it's just kind of in that stage of absorbing more of what's possible and seeing how that adjusts things. Like, I mean, one client that I was talking with said, we've had to essentially pivot things like, we didn't pivot anything for a decade in how we talked about what we did. And then we've had to change it like 4 or 5 times just in the last year. So that just kind of, it's like, I think there's a lot of, I guess, maybe uncertainty around, how are things going to shake out when they finally sort of settle. But right now we're kind of in that stage where nothing is settled yet. And then so it's hard to know exactly where the agency work is going to settle as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you said something interesting with like most, and this is probably most agencies, they're really good at building stuff for clients. The marketing is kind of lost on them, or it's new to them, or however you want to put it. Um, it seems like now is like a really powerful time for a dev agency to like use code as a form of marketing, right? Because before, you would invest thousands of team hours to building something that some internal project, when now that's all gone out the window. So maybe, you do that exercise you mentioned, you find, oh, most of our best clients are in these three related industries, or this one industry, they have these two related problems, and you're putting out a free or cheap software product that solves some part of that problem. And like you're not even hoping to profit from it directly. It's mostly just a loss leader to get people in. Like that's where my head goes. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I think a lot of times dev agencies think that like some sort of their lead gen or their lead magnets need to be white papers or something sort of old school. But honestly, something that provides real tangible value, even has AI integrated into it, can be a great thing. Like I've experimented with this myself. I put together uh, like an assessment or diagnostic sort of tool called the relevance score. I put together a homepage messaging analysis tool called Signal Check, where you can just like plug in your homepage URL and it says, okay, here's where you know where you could be clearer. Here's your kind of like letter score, and here are recommendations for how you can improve that. So it's kind of like it's helping people kind of, I guess, maybe solve one problem that's one facet of what I can help them with, in a longer term engagement. And I think that sort of approach can be really effective for dev agencies too. Like provide something that helps a founder or helps a legacy company figure out where there's opportunity related to what they provide. It's like, oh, you need something that helps you build your MVP requirements. Like here, we built something for you, or um, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of ideas that could be built fairly quickly, especially if they're not as high stakes as building a big, secure, fancy software product.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and it just seems like we're in this interesting era where code and dev projects can kind of be separated from the need of having to like validate, having to be products, having to be like profitable products in and of themselves. So I'm excited for it. I'm excited for like the art that comes from it. But yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. I mean, it's still very much early days, it feels like. When the internet came out, I remember, there were skeptics who were like, "Oh yeah, that internet, like that thing will never take off." And here we are, and it's central to so much of what we do. Um, Same thing with smartphones and stuff like that. So I think AI will probably be baked into a lot more of our everyday lives in the future, but I don't think it's going to take over our lives, or I hope not.
Yeah, yeah. We'll see. So, David, with that, this has been so much fun. Where can people go to get more of what you're up to and get in touch and so on?
Yeah, the best place is probably my website, House Advisors, HAUS, House Advisors, all one word, and then or just look me up on LinkedIn, David Hose. Last name is spelled HOOS. I post a lot of content about kind of what's working, what's not working in agency growth, and so would love to interact or chat there.
Awesome. We'll get that linked up. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.